talk about whether or not crack and marijuana should be legal. Now, there's a lot of people that believe these drugs should be perfectly legal. Because if you look at alcohol, I mean, alcohol kills hundreds of thousands of people a year, and it's perfectly legal. A lot of people think if you legalize these drugs, it's going to make the crime rate go up. When in actuality, it's probably going to go down, because if you legalize these drugs, you're getting rid of all the drug dealers on the street corner. So I think there would be less crime on a lot of these streets. I would much rather for a crackhead to go to the store and buy crack than go to the street corner and buy crack. People are going to do drugs regardless, whether they're legal or not legal. I just think it's completely ridiculous to send a person to prison for doing drugs. If a person is a drug addict, they're a debt to themselves. They're not a debt to society. They're not committing a crime against anybody else. That's why I don't think drug addicts should be sent to prison. I think a drug addict should be sent to rehab. They shouldn't be sent to prison. That's why I think the prison system needs to be reformed. There's no reason why a person that sits in the privacy of their own home and smokes crack or smokes weed or does whatever should be sent to prison, because that's their business. That's their private life. I don't condone drug use. I don't drink or smoke. I don't do any of this. But I just think it's completely ridiculous to send a person to prison for having a drug addiction. It's ridiculous. If a person wants to do drugs in the privacy of their home, they should have the right to do that. If you look at countries like Amsterdam, Amsterdam has one of the lowest crime rates in the world because drugs are perfectly legal. Prostitution is perfectly legal. There's actually less crime in the country because of this. Because a lot of these things are legal in America or illegal in America, this is the reason why the crime rate is so high. Because a lot of these people will go underground and do this. They'll go to the street corner and do it. They'll go to the alleys and do it. If it was perfectly legal, people would just go to the store. I would much rather for a person to go to the store and buy crack or buy marijuana than go to the street corner and do it. Then go to the alley and do it. If you go back to the 1930s and the 1920s, when prohibition was going on, where alcohol was illegal, it was more crime because it was illegal. People did it on the down low, and that's what made the crime rate go up during the 1920s. And once they kept alcohol legal after prohibition, that's what made the crime rate go down. You didn't see all these people fighting and killing each other over alcohol because it was perfectly legal. And I think the same thing would happen with crack, marijuana, and all these other drugs. If this was perfectly legal, you wouldn't have all these people fighting and killing each other over these drugs. That's why I think all these drugs should be perfectly legal. I think crack should be legal. I think marijuana should be legal. I believe heroin should be legal. A lot of people think if we legalize these drugs, that it's going to make more people do drugs. I think that's completely ridiculous. If they legalize all these drugs tomorrow, the same people that was doing it yesterday are going to be doing it today. There's not going to be more or less. There's probably going to be less. Because a lot of people do drugs for the thrill of doing it, for the thrill of it being illegal. So I think a lot of younger people would stop doing drugs, because a lot of younger people do drugs because they want to experience the thrill of doing something that's illegal. If it was legal, I mean, you would probably see less younger people doing it. And like I said, I think the entire prison system should be reformed. There is no reason why a person that's a drug addict should be sent to prison. This is completely ridiculous. How is it that if a person rapes and molests a child, they only get a couple of years in prison. But you'll give 5 or 10 years to somebody that's a drug addict. You'll give 5 or 10 years to somebody that sits in the privacy of their home and smokes crack. I mean, who's a bigger debt to society? A drug addict or a child molester? I mean, I think we all can agree that the child molester is a bigger debt to society. But why is it that they'll let the child molester off the hook, but if a person smokes crack, they'll give them 10 years in prison? I mean, that's completely ridiculous. This is why our entire prison system needs to be reformed. If you're gonna, I think the punishment should fit the crime. There is no reason why people who commit minor crimes should be given 10 and 20 years in prison. A person that's a drug addict is not a debt to society. They're a debt to themselves. I believe drug addicts should be sent to rehab. They shouldn't be sent to prison. This is why our prison system needs to be reformed. And I believe most of these drugs should be legalized. They definitely should legalize marijuana. Marijuana is probably the least harmful drug out of all of these drugs. Alcohol is worse than marijuana. Tobacco is worse than marijuana. I mean, I just think a lot of people are basing these laws on their religious beliefs. I mean, it's completely ridiculous that you would base a lot of these laws on your religious beliefs. I mean, I'm a Christian, but I don't want to force my beliefs on other people. That's why I consider myself a libertarian. Because, I mean, we believe in all these drugs should be legal. The government shouldn't have the right to tell people what to do in their personal lives. That's what freedom of choice is. That's what freedom of liberty is. If you're not bothering anybody else and you're doing this in the privacy of your own home, you're doing drugs in the privacy of your home, in your own home, you should have the right to do that. You're not bothering anybody. They're not forcing anybody else to do this. If this is what you want to do in the privacy of your own home, you should have the right to do that. That's what freedom of choice is. As long as you're not bothering anybody else, you should have the right to do it. That's why I believe in freedom of choice. I don't agree with drug use. I don't condone drug use. But if that's what somebody wants to do, they should have the right to do it. The government doesn't have the right to control people's personal lives. That's why I believe in freedom of choice. And the ridiculous notion that we send people to prison for smoking crack or smoking weed or doing heroin is just completely ridiculous. Tell me what you think about this. Rate and subscribe. Leave a comment and tell me what you think about this.